3 minutes ago, the unthinkable happened. Prince Edward stepped forward and confirmed a secret that the palace has spent decades burying. His voice, calm but visibly shaken, cracked the fragile illusion of unity within the royal walls. What was whispered behind sealed chamber doors is now erupting in front of millions. The monarchy's final line of defense has just betrayed its silence, and nothing will ever be the same. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The world didn't just witness a royal speech, it witnessed a collapse. Prince Edward, the most reserved and consistent of the Queen's children, the one who always walked the tightrope of diplomacy and duty, finally broke formation. With cameras rolling and silence thick in the air, he confirmed what insiders had feared and what the monarchy had worked for years to suppress. The words he spoke were simple, but their implications were devastating. "It's time the truth was known," he said, 6 words that echoed through the marble halls of Windsor and across every screen around the globe. For decades, Edward was the silent guardian of secrets he did not ask for, bound by the loyalty he inherited rather than chose. But something changed. Something pushed him to cross the line. And in that moment, the crown lost its final barrier of containment. What made this confession even more disturbing was the absence of any other senior royal. Neither King Charles, nor Prince William, nor even Princess Anne was present or mentioned. Edward stood alone, a man clearly burdened by the weight of generations. The Royal Communications Office issued only a chillingly brief response, no comment. And with that, silence became complicity. Within minutes, global headlines erupted, Twitter flooded with speculation, and conspiracy theories that once lived in the shadows began rising with renewed fury. But beneath the noise, the undercurrent was unmistakable. Something real had been uncovered, something dark, something intentionally hidden. Edward's tone was not one of vengeance or rebellion, it was heartbreak. In his voice was the sound of a man who had waited too long, suffered too deeply, and finally realized that silence was no longer safety, it was betrayal. Sources closest to the palace claim Edward had been carrying this knowledge since before the Queen's passing, urged to wait, to delay, to protect the legacy. But whose legacy? His mother's, his brother's, or the monarchy's illusion of control? It's becoming clear that Edward's confirmation was not impulsive. It was calculated, long prepared, and coordinated with a source of power far greater than the public yet understands. What exactly was he referring to? What could be so monumental that it shook a man like Edward into defiance? Reports indicate a reference to an event buried by the vaults, a cryptic phrase that has left royal analysts scrambling for context. And while the press and public alike demand answers, the royal machine has gone quiet, too quiet. There are whispers that Edward has more to say, that this is only the first drop in what may become a tidal wave of revelations that no royal strategist can spin into obedience. But what exactly did Prince Edward confirm, and why now, after years of enforced silence? The next revelation takes us into the heart of the cover-up. The palace tried desperately to erase. What if the most powerful institution in Britain had been hiding a royal decree that could shatter its own foundation? Edward's cryptic mention of the vaults wasn't poetic, it was literal. Sources now reveal that a royal document, locked under extreme security, holds the truth behind decades of misdirection. A truth so explosive its release was marked as a threat to national stability. In the hours following Edward's confession, whispers turned into frantic investigations, and those close to the inner walls of Windsor began to murmur one phrase over and over again: the Obsidian Protocol. A term never uttered in public until now, its very existence had been denied for decades, but according to a senior former aide, it is the codename for an official royal directive sealed under the highest classification, stored not in the public record, but within the subterranean archives below Windsor Castle, behind biometric locks, accessible by only 3 living royals. The fact that Edward named it publicly was not just a break in protocol, it was an act of royal defiance with seismic implications. Insiders say the contents of this document go far beyond family disputes or ceremonial precedents. They redefine what the monarchy is and who it answers to. the most shocking revelation? The Obsidian Protocol directly contradicts the current line of succession. Where the public sees order, the document spells chaos. Sources who claim to have viewed summaries of its contents allege that it names an alternative heir, a designation forged under emergency circumstances and signed during a moment of profound national instability. The origin of the protocol traces back to the final years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, when she reportedly became concerned about the moral and constitutional direction of the monarchy. In a closed-door meeting involving only 4 individuals, herself, Charles, Edward, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, a contingency succession was outlined and sealed. That very clause, according to leaks, was never meant to surface unless the monarchy itself faced an existential crisis. But Edward's recent statement implies that crisis has arrived. Adding another twist, it appears that Princess Diana played a pivotal role in influencing this buried decree. Before her tragic death, Diana had reportedly sent a confidential letter to Queen Elizabeth, voicing fears that certain individuals were being manipulated into positions of power they neither earned nor deserved. One line from the letter now haunts the halls of Windsor: "Protect the crown from within, or it will consume itself." While the contents of the Obsidian Protocol remain officially unconfirmed, it's widely believed that Diana's influence pushed the Queen toward an emergency override clause, one that could be activated only by unanimous consent of the Council of Three, which included the Queen, Charles, and Edward. But the most dangerous layer of this entire web is the legal advice reportedly given to Charles in the years after the Queen's death. According to palace insiders, a team of legal advisors urged him to destroy the protocol altogether, labeling it a dormant threat to the smooth operation of the monarchy. Charles allegedly refused, fearing the public reaction if it were ever leaked, and instead buried the original beneath Windsor, placing a counter-document in its place to mislead future investigators. But with Edward's sudden confirmation, the deception is unraveling faster than anyone anticipated. But this decree isn't just words on paper, it connects to a figure whose role in royal history has been dangerously misunderstood. The beloved Princess of Wales, admired, graceful, resilient. But according to the suppressed documents, Catherine's path to power wasn't just unlikely, it was prohibited. Edward's statement directly contradicts the palace's narrative, hinting that the late Queen had once signed a secret memorandum barring Catherine Farr on any sovereign decision-making role. That revelation, buried beneath the velvet layers of royal ceremony, now fractures the very image the monarchy worked tirelessly to preserve. For years, Catherine was positioned as the shining future of the royal family, a bridge between the modern age and the traditions of the past. But behind closed doors, a different reality unfolded. Edward referenced something chilling: Appendix Windsor 4, a classified clause tucked within a broader memorandum that had been quietly circulated among the Queen's senior legal advisors during the twilight of her reign. This appendix, according to sources close to the royal archives, explicitly outlined limitations on Catherine's eligibility to assume strategic power in any royal capacity beyond ceremonial function. It wasn't just protocol, it was protection. The Queen, fearing a repeat of the Diana phenomenon, had allegedly attempted to prevent another outsider from dominating the Crown's future narrative. Handwritten marginalia, believed to be penned by Elizabeth herself, were once attached to the document. Those personal notes have since vanished. The palace claimed at the time that the annotations were irrelevant reflections, but Edward's confirmation now suggests otherwise. He referenced a quote, once written in the Queen's own script: "Popularity must not dictate succession." The meaning was clear, and the target was clearer: Catherine. And what's more, Edward subtly acknowledged that these concerns weren't shared in a vacuum. There had been conflict at the highest level, including a deeply personal confrontation between King Charles and the Queen, shortly before her final retreat to Balmoral. That conversation, insiders whisper, ended with Charles storming out and Elizabeth remaining seated, her hands clasped over the very memorandum in question. Behind the ornate facades, senior courtiers had already begun discussing what one advisor reportedly called containment strategies to reduce Catherine's public visibility and increase Camilla's dominance in both media and ceremonial hierarchy. Plans were quietly laid, engagements reassigned, and correspondence rewritten. But then, something unexpected happened. William. He refused. He stood his ground. When the memorandum was brought to him, the future king allegedly tore it in half and declared, "This ends here." That single act is said to have created a fracture so deep that it not only altered family dynamics but splintered the inner circle of succession planning. William's stance placed him on a collision course with forces determined to keep Catherine beneath a glass ceiling she was never meant to shatter. Then came the moment that changed everything. Camilla, who had been increasingly central in these covert maneuvers, suddenly disappeared from the public schedule for 36 hours. No explanation was ever given, and her return was marked by a distant stiffness, one that has never fully vanished. During that window of absence, Catherine stepped into a scheduled state function in her place, reportedly at William's insistence. That appearance was televised, global, and unplanned by the palace. It was also the turning point. From that day forward, Catherine's role could no longer be denied. The people had seen her, and no buried memorandum, no matter how secret, could unsee what was now public truth. Yet Catherine wasn't the only one erased from destiny. The next twist involves someone even closer to Edward himself. What if your destiny was stolen before you ever had a chance to live it? Lady Louise Windsor, gentle, brilliant, and rarely in headlines, was once secretly named in a royal heirloom clause that would have changed her status forever. But according to Edward, the palace moved swiftly to erase her from that path, and now we know why. Until now, Lady Louise had been treated as a footnote. In the royal narrative, a quiet presence, away from public scrutiny, spoken of occasionally but never seriously discussed as a player in the monarchy's future. But behind that silence, a storm had been raging for years. In Edward's recent confirmation, a single line cracked the surface. "My daughter was born into silence not by fate but by force." That chilling statement has now cast new light on the hidden codicil to Prince Philip's private will, one that, if honoured, would have granted Lady Louise unprecedented standing. According to leaked accounts, Philip had intended for Louise to be elevated, not merely as a royal granddaughter, but as a bearer of one of the family's oldest ceremonial titles. The codicil, however, was suppressed before it could be read to the wider council. The reason? Its existence was labelled destabilizing. It wasn't just the crown that stood in the way. Camilla's inner circle allegedly acted swiftly and strategically to block the recognition. Several insiders now claim there was fear that elevating Louise young, well-liked and untainted by scandal, could threaten the future optics of Camilla's own legacy. And so the solution was swift erasure. Her name was excluded from succession-related briefings, her role reduced to minor appearances. But there was one person who never accepted that erasure: Princess Anne. For years, Anne quietly took Louise under her wing, offering the kind of guidance usually reserved for senior royals in waiting. At the time, it was dismissed as sentiment. Now it appears it was preparation. Edward, too, had remained quietly vigilant until the pressure became too much. He could no longer watch his daughter be cast in permanent shadow. His words, once bottled in loyalty, erupted in sorrow. He reportedly begged Charles to revisit codicil, only to be met with political resistance and cold avoidance. But then something changed. A senior aide, now believed to be one of Elizabeth's most trusted, leaked the existence of a sealed envelope marked with an ominous phrase, to be opened only upon Charles's incapacitation. That envelope, according to unverified reports, contains a formal recognition of Louise's dormant title, handwritten in the Queen's own script and signed just weeks before her passing. It remains sealed, but its mere existence terrifies those who built the illusion that Louise was never meant to matter. What stands out now is the defiance woven through the heartbreak. Catherine, recognizing the injustice, is said to have urged William to quietly intervene on Louise's behalf. It was Catherine who reportedly ensured Louise was seated prominently at a recent royal observance against Camilla's wishes. That small act was not an accident. It was a message. And now, in the wake of Edward's bold exposure, Louise is no longer the forgotten daughter of the royal line. She is the echo of a legacy too long ignored, and the palace's attempt to silence her only made her presence thunder louder. And just when Edward began to fight back internally, the resistance he faced would reveal the true depth of royal manipulation. Forget the crown, the robes, or public ceremonies. Behind Buckingham's ceremonial facade lies an invisible network of power, one Edward calls the Clarion Council. And for the first time, we now know who sits on it, what they control, and what they did to ensure silence. Until today, the monarchy that millions see, the pageantry, the balcony waves, the gilded thrones, is only a mask. The real power has never worn robes or sworn oaths in public. It exists in the shadows, in drawing rooms and private estates, in unrecorded meetings far from the scrutiny of Parliament or press. The Clari, on council, as Prince Edward revealed, is not a constitutional body. It holds no legal authority, but it commands everything. Formed decades ago during a period of royal upheaval, its purpose was simple yet terrifying: preserve the crown's global image at all costs, no matter who had to be removed or erased in the process. Made up of a triad of legacy aristocrats, foreign policy intermediaries, and financial controllers tied to centuries-old banking interests, this council answers to no sovereign. Its loyalty is to the idea of monarchy, not the people who wear the crown. Edward's confession sent a jolt through that secret network. Because now, the public knows what only a few dared to whisper. In 2017, Edward attempted to step away from the Clarion Council after growing increasingly disturbed by its actions, particularly its manipulation of royal narratives and its quiet interventions in internal family matters. But walking away wasn't an option. He was summoned to a location later identified as Clarion House, a country estate owned by a foreign diplomat with deep ties to British intelligence. There he was presented with what amounted to a threat, exile, or compliance. Edward returned from that meeting subdued and for years remained silent, until now. Among the council's most chilling acts was the suppression of Princess Diana's second codicil, a legal document drafted just months before her death. It reportedly outlined her wishes for future roles within the monarchy, including a bold recommendation for an alternate path in royal guidance, one that involved Catherine and excluded Camilla entirely. The council labelled the document a threat to narrative cohesion and acted swiftly to bury it. The legal team involved in Diana's estate was pressured to comply. Only fragments remain today, hidden across different jurisdictions. But Edward's inclusion of this detail in his statement confirms what many feared. Diana was silenced long before her voice was lost forever. Even more disturbing is the discovery of a clandestine meeting codenamed Blackveil. According to an internal memo leaked days after Edward's reveal, Blackveil was the moment the council finalized a strategy to lock down succession security, forever cutting off any possibility of deviation from the Charles-Camilla axis. It included surveillance on specific royals, document redactions, and the systematic neutralization of anything deemed emotionally volatile, including Lady Louise and Prince Harry. That single meeting recalibrated the monarchy's core for the next 50 years, and did so without a single vote from the people of Britain. And yet, in exposing the council, Edward didn't just lift the curtain on institutional control. He delivered a name that wasn't supposed to surface, one that reopens old wounds and forces the palace to reckon with a ghost that has never truly left. But Edward's confirmation didn't end with exposure. He included a name no one expected, shaking even the foundations of grief. Her voice has been silenced for over 2 decades, but Diana's legacy just took center stage again. Edward's statement includes a single line: "My sister-in-law's true wishes were never honored." And now, leaked recordings and handwritten letters paint a devastating picture of betrayal, not just by the crown, but by those Diana once trusted. The impact of that statement cannot be overstated. For years, Diana's memory was carefully curated, wrapped in selective tribute and sanitized legacy. But beneath that glossy reverence lived a truth far more unsettling one, that Edward has now unearthed in a move that some call courageous and others call treasonous. The world now knows that Diana had privately recorded a cassette addressed not to the public, not to her sons, but to Edward. On that tape, she poured out a chilling confession that she feared her wishes would be buried, and that the people she had once considered allies were positioning themselves to rewrite the royal future without her voice. In her own words, she referred to something called the Obsidian Child, a code name she used for the person she believed would protect her legacy. That person, she said clearly, was Catherine, not Camilla, not anyone else. Catherine. But the cassette wasn't the only thing hidden. Diana's second diary, a personal volume of thoughts and predictions, was reportedly removed from her residence days before her fatal accident. To this day, the diary has never resurfaced. Sources close to her security detail at the time claim the removal was orchestrated by a senior palace figure, acting under what was described as urgent national interest. Now, with Edward confirming he has had a copy of one of Diana's final handwritten letters in his possession for years, locked away in a vault at Bagshot Park, the question becomes terrifyingly clear: how much of Diana's truth was stolen before the world had the chance to hear it? That letter, now under forensic review by international archivists, directly contradicts the official narrative surrounding succession and influence. It warns of manipulation, of emotional coercion, and of a growing faction within the palace that was building a future that would erase the past. Perhaps the most unsettling part of Diana's account is her final face-to-face interaction with Camilla. According to the letter and the corroborated testimony of a royal aide, the conversation turned hostile. Diana accused Camilla of interfering with her son's future. Camilla, in response, allegedly warned that whatever is written can be unwritten. Diana reportedly walked out of the room visibly shaken, and within 72 hours, her personal safe had been unemptied, its contents permanently unrecovered. Edward has now admitted that he kept this information close not out of fear, but because he believed no one would listen. It wasn't until Catherine herself began to be targeted that he knew he had to act. The timeline, the players, the suppressed materials, they all form the same horrifying conclusion: that Diana's voice was intentionally removed so that the crown could rewrite the succession according to a script she would have never approved. And the revelation that Catherine was chosen by Diana not as a replacement, but as a protector, upends everything the monarchy has tried to portray for the past 20 years. And then came the final blow. Edward revealed the one royal figure who fought alongside him to bring this secret to light. They thought she was loyal to the core. But Princess Anne, long seen as the monarchy's most dutiful guardian, has been quietly dismantling the system from within. According to Edward, Anne knew everything. And now we're learning just how far she went to protect Diana's wishes, Catherine's destiny, and the truth the crown refused to face. For decades, Princess Anne wore the armor of loyalty, discipline, and tradition. She never wavered in public, never strayed from protocol, and never courted scandal. But beneath that iron composure, a storm was quietly brewing. Edward's revelation has now shattered the illusion that Anne was merely a bystander to the unfolding drama behind palace walls. In truth, she was a silent strategist, working in the shadows to preserve what the monarchy was too afraid to confront. During the years dominated by the Clarion Council's grip, Anne maintained private contact with Edward through encrypted correspondence and coded verbal messages, evading the very systems designed to monitor senior royals. According to Edward, they had a phrase, the second path, which signal any movement regarding Diana's hidden legacy and Catherine's rising danger within royal ranks. But it didn't stop there. Anne didn't just watch, she acted. Documents now confirmed to be real were smuggled out of royal estates under her direction and handed to a discreet legal advisor once connected to Diana's former trust. Among those documents was a draft of the original Balmoral Directive, a royal note dictated by Diana and witnessed by one senior member of staff, naming Catherine as the rightful moral heir to her legacy. That directive had gone missing after Diana's death. But it was Anne who found it again, buried in a mislabeled file inside one of the Queen's private Balmoral cabinets. According to one of the aides who assisted in its retrieval, Anne didn't speak a word as she read the note. She simply placed it in her bag and left the room. What followed was a confrontation that changed everything. Two aides witnessed a private exchange between Anne and Camilla behind closed doors. Shortly after the directive surfaced, the conversation grew loud, furious even. Camilla demanded answers. Anne reportedly replied, "I don't owe you silence anymore." The tension between the two women, long rumoured, was now undeniable. But Anne didn't stop there. She later warned William personally that the Clarion Council had plans to sideline Catherine and suppress Diana's final intentions. That meeting, held without Charles's knowledge, marked a turning point in William's alignment and set the stage for the rift that would fracture the family from within. By 2021, a quiet pact was forming, one so delicate it remained invisible even to seasoned royal watchers. Anne and Catherine, two women from entirely different worlds, began working in quiet coordination. Subtle public support, strategic appearances, and carefully chosen language in speeches revealed a new alliance built not on ambition, but on truth. This pact, fueled by decades of injustice and held together by mutual respect, stood in direct opposition to everything the Clarion Council had tried to construct. And just when Edward thought they had a chance to correct the past, the monarchy made its final move. As Edward's words ripple across the globe, the palace scrambles behind locked doors. Operation Gilded Lock, activated within minutes of Edward's statement, isn't a crisis response. It's a containment strategy. What they didn't expect was how fast the truth would spiral and who would defy the order. Inside the royal establishment, panic replaced protocol. Within 10 minutes of Edward's broadcast, senior palace staff were logged out of the internal communication grid. Archived emails, restricted documents, and decades of encrypted files were suddenly inaccessible even to department heads. According to a source inside the royal private office, an emergency lockdown of Windsor's main digital server was ordered under what's now been identified as Clause Cobalt, a rarely used protocol meant to counter leaks during wartime or constitutional threat. The move, while extreme, made one thing abundantly clear: this wasn't about optics anymore. This was about survival. But the clampdown backfired almost instantly. When staff realized what they were being shut out of, whispers of a cover-up turned into furious side-channel leaks, screenshots, old briefings, memos that had long been ignored. Suddenly, Edward's statement was no longer an isolated confession. It had context, evidence, and momentum. Meanwhile, inside Clarence's house, Camilla reportedly left a scheduled diplomatic planning meeting midway through. Witnesses say she looked pale, shaken, and uncharacteristically speechless. Her departure, unexplained and abrupt, sent shockwaves across media desks. Even loyal outlets began asking questions they'd previously avoided. When reporters reached out to the palace for comment, the only response issued was a legally sanitized statement warning of reputational harm and unauthorized disclosures. But those veiled threats did little to stop what had already begun. Within hours, #EdwardWasRight was trending across multiple continents. Royal correspondents were forced to break ranks. Anonymous sources, previously silent for years, stepped forward with long-forgotten receipts. The heart of the unfolding chaos, two key figures remained conspicuously absent: William and Catherine. Their whereabouts unconfirmed, multiple insiders now report that the couple, along with Princess Anne, had convened at a private estate outside London. Described as an emergency sovereignty alignment, the meeting was not officially sanctioned and did not include Charles. This alone signals the most dangerous fracture within the monarchy since the abdication crisis. Reports suggest that in that room, a plan was being discussed, not for damage control, but for redirection. A redirection that would honor Diana's forgotten wishes, elevate Catherine to her intended status, and confront Camilla's political hold head-on. The most haunting reaction came from someone the public hadn't heard from in years, a former aide to Queen Elizabeth, now retired, who spoke anonymously to an independent outlet. "This is what she feared," he said. "Not the truth, but the rage it would unleash once the lies collapsed." His words reflect a monarchy that now teeters between revelation and ruin, held together only by protocol and the fading echoes of tradition. The silence from Charles is deafening. His last public appearance days before Edward's statement now feels like a farewell. And still, no rebuttal, no denial. only layers of institutional panic thickening by the hour. But even with the palace in chaos, Edward's final move may be the most dangerous of all. He didn't just speak, he acted. Edward has now placed the original sealed documents in the hands of an independent international tribunal. His message? Let the truth belong to the people. In doing so, he may have burned every royal bridge behind him, but forged a new path history cannot ignore. The move was as devastating as it was deliberate. In a world where the royal institution thrives on silence, secrecy, and internal arbitration, Edward bypassed every gatekeeper and surrendered the monarchy's most guarded truths to an entity beyond their control. The dossier over 2 decades of correspondence, hidden directives, voice recordings, and legal drafts was delivered in full to a global media consortium partnered with international legal observers. Edward gave no conditions, no redactions, no restraints. It was an act of absolute release. Within 24 hours, multiple outlets confirmed they had received identical encrypted copies, and by the following dawn, the first leaks had already begun to trickle across encrypted channels, verified by unnamed insiders who once served within the monarchy's highest chamber. This wasn't just a leak, it was liberation. Edward's decision marks the first time a senior royal has willingly dismantled the myth of controlled legacy and handed that power to the public. In the process, he crossed a line no one believed he'd ever dare approach. But the consequences were immediate. Sources inside the palace confirm that his name has been quietly removed from internal ceremonial rosters. His honorary appointments, military and civil, are now under review. And yet, beyond the fury and fallout, there was one reaction that mattered most. Catherine. An unconfirmed but credible report states she made private contact with Edward mere hours after the release, delivering a simple message: "You did what I never could." The source claims tears were shed. For the first time, there was nothing left to hide behind. In the background, William has remained silent but not inactive. Insiders now suggest he is preparing a public address, one that will attempt to bridge the unimaginable divide that has formed between the monarchy and its people. But the timing, the tone, and the outcome of that statement remain a mystery. What cannot be ignored is the absence that now echoes louder than any words. Camilla. Her name has been completely scrubbed from the royal schedule for the next 90 days. Public events, charity engagements, ceremonial duties gone. No explanation has been given. Some say she is abroad, others claim she's still within palace walls. Either way, the silence is deafening. What remains is a monarchy more vulnerable than ever before. The people are no longer standing at the gates, they're holding the keys. With Diana's memory reawakened, Catherine's legacy reignited, and Anne's quiet rebellion exposed, the institution must now decide whether it will evolve or collapse beneath the weight of its own deception. Edward's final act was not just a release of documents, it was a declaration. That power, when hoarded, corrupts. But when shared, it redeems. For all his restraint over the years, he chose his moment. And when it came, he didn't whisper. He roared. As the monarchy grapples with exposure and betrayal, the world watches. Because what began as one man's whisper has erupted into a royal reckoning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.